I'm supposed to speak about quantum psychology today, and I call to mind a Far Side cartoon. Two leopards in a tree, and there's a man coming down the path toward them with a blithe, happy expression, not looking up, looking at the path in front of him. And one leopard is saying to the other, "Now remember, growl when we jump. These things have the most interesting expressions." Which is sort of a leopard's eye view of humanity. We tend to see things too much from the human point of view. I wrote a novel once called Schrodinger's Cat, which dealt with quantum psychology. And the first sentence of that novel was, "The majority of Terrans was six-legged." And what inspired me to write that was the thought that we do tend to look at things too much from the human point of view. The overwhelming majority of sentient beings on this planet are bugs. If the Buddha mind, everything that manifests is another permutation of the Buddha mind is absolutely bonkers about being a bug. And it very seldom takes the form of a human being. There are more beetles than anybody. This is true. There are not only more beetles than any other life form on the planet, but there are more species of beetles than there are of any other living creature. The great British mathematical biologist J.B.S. Haldane was once asked, if you admitted a mind behind evolution, what trait would you attribute to it? And he said, an inordinate fondness for beetles. I was in the Lincoln Park Zoo in Chicago once, and I was looking at the great horned owl, and there was a sign on the cage of the great horned owl that said, this should be considered a desirable bird. and then some people seem to have got more humor out of that than I intended. These must be people who've studied Shakespeare carefully and remember the immortal verse, a habit obscene and unsavory holds the Bishop of Boston in slavery. Amidst hootings and howls, he deflowers young owls, which he keeps in an underground aviary. But aside from poetry, the sign went on to explain that the great horned owl should be considered a desirable bird because it eats a lot of critters that farmers don't like. And I thought, this is a zoo is supposed to be run by zoologists. Zoologists are supposed to be scientifically educated. And here we're getting this blatant human chauvinism. An animal is good if it eats other animals that we don't like. Now, I'm convinced from the point of view of the great horned owl was a desirable bird no matter what human beings think about it. And on top of that, the critters it eats will never regard it as a desirable bird, no matter how much you argue about it. They are going to go on regarding the great horned owl as actively nefarious. Getting back to the leopards in the tree, these things have the most interesting expressions. I think that is one of the outstanding proofs of Larson's genius is the word things. It's very hard for us to think of ourselves as things. But that's undoubtedly the way we seem to ants. What's this big thing in the way? How do we get over this thing? My God, this thing moves occasionally. When we move suddenly, they probably think it's an earthquake. Every animal has its own view of the world, which in ethology and other biological sciences is called the Umwelt. U-M-W-E-L-T. See, I'm going nice and slow. Umwelt. Every animal has its own Umwelt. For instance, snakes do not see three-dimensional bodies the way we do. Snakes see energy fields, heat energy chiefly. If you saw the world the way a snake sees the world, it would look very much like a spiritualist seance. A great deal of grayish black and a few blobs of light darting around. Or maybe it would look like somebody's home movie of a close encounter with a UFO. And that's the way snakes see the world. Dogs see it a different way. Every animal has its own genetic hardwired programs about what's important. Your cat knows damn well the most important thing in the house is the cat food. And it's very hard to get them interested in anything else until they've got enough cat food. And every animal lives in an entirely different universe, the Umwelt of that animal. Darwin said the fittest survive. In some parts of the soil, the earthworms are the fittest, and they survive there. So what Darwin really meant was the survivors survive. For this, he got to be world famous.
Hi. It's always funny to start off talking at something like this because I always know that there's this mix of people here, ranging from folks who've never heard of me before, having the slightest idea what I'm doing here or what's happening, to folks who probably know things about me my mother doesn't know. You know? So I know that there's a whole spectrum, but I'm going to have to kind of take it from the top anyway. You know? And I'm part of a certain sociological group. You know, I don't know if you're aware of this, but the Beatniks and the Hells Angels are contemporaries. And all of them are Korean veterans who came back to no jobs. And the Hells Angels were the guys that used to work at the Fontana Steel Mill down by Ontario, California, and they came back from Korea and had no jobs, and they became the Hells Angels. And a lot of my friends came back from Korea and then went to college, and we became beatniks. You know, so although I have hung out with the hippies, I'm actually a beatnik that was set back a generation for being in the Marine Corps. I fell in with the hippies. I was teaching English at San Francisco State College, and the hippies sort of like came up around me. You know, it's like usually when a scene happens, you miss the scene. By the time you hear about it, it's already begun to decay a little, you know, when you arrive at the scene. But I was there, this scene just came up around me, and I've always felt like that farmer down in Mexico where this crack happened in his cornfield, and he went to the priest and he says, "The devil's coming up in my cornfield." And him and the priest went out to look at the cornfield, and it was cracking open, and lava was starting to come out of it, and they ran, and over the next year, it grew a 5,000-foot cinder cone on his cornfield. And that's what it was like to have the hippies come up around you. Suddenly, there was this, people were saying, "Hippies, hippies," and a few long-haired kids were showing up, and then suddenly, they were all over the place. I mean, they were thicker than roaches. They were thicker than locusts, you know. And so that's how some people felt, like locusts, you know, about them. And I was teaching English at San Francisco State College, and my kids came to me and said, "You know, you're an interesting teacher, and we like you and everything, but you don't know what's going on. And we're not going to listen to you until you find out something." I said, "All right, what do I have to do?" They said, "You got to go see this movie for a start." I said, "What's that called?" He said, "A Hard Day's Night." So I went to see A Hard Day's Night, and my mind was blown for several reasons. One of them was I was from an old enough generation that the idea of seeing young people wield that kind of power was just breathtaking. I said, "Look at these people. They're kids and they're powerful." You know, I was just astonished by that. And I didn't know anybody of that generation had any power. Well, like it says inside the front page of our book, "Hey Beatnik, I'm going to follow God, I'm going to follow God, I am not coming back." That's how it is with the hippies. I went to follow them, and I am not coming back. I love the hippies so much. They had such pure heart. They had such courage, you know. They were, those young men were some of the amazing, you know. They were as pretty as girls and as brave as bullfighters and fighter pilots. And when the word came out that hippie girls were not going to be giving any to straight boys that went to war, they were going to save it for nice long-hair boys that didn't go to war, who said, "This is a good deal." You know, this was the Lysistrata of the 60s, you know, and it was real too, because it suddenly turned out that the nicest girls were following these long hairs, you know, and all of that kind of thing was part of the revolution. Well, at a point, I got too weird to keep teaching at San Francisco State College, and my contract expired about the same time I got too weird to get rehired. I'd started showing up stoned and racing leathers and paisley shirts to class and stuff, and so they were glad to get rid of me, and I went to go hang out with the kids. So we were being cared for in a way, you know, and that was one of the first times when I started learning about the leprechaun effect. I will get back to the leprechaun effect later on. So when we came back off the caravan, we got back to San Francisco, we had become a community while we were on the road. We didn't know we were going to become a community, but we had become one on the road. And we had learned what our powers were. When we left the city, people were afraid to drive a school bus because it was so big and heavy. By the time we had been on the caravan, we had learned how to change the engine in the school bus overnight. We learned that you can put enough people around a school bus to pick it up and carry it. You know, we were not snowed by a school bus anymore by the time we came off that caravan, you know. And that we burned one of them up, and so we just said, let's make it into a pickup truck and cut off the back of it and put a flatbed on it and made a pickup truck out of it, and we would tear into anything. I always feel like the farm in its best place was like Little Abner, where it says, any fool can do it. Little Abner says, let me try. And that was our attitude a lot, and it worked good.
Well, the days they fly by lightning fast, I'm waiting for the thunder. Don't know where you're going or where you're from, but would you like to come on under? Would you like to come on under? Would you like to come on under? I feel cold, but my head is dry and the sky is falling. I'm coming down. Let me walk you around.